My guest is Dr. Beau Lotto. Beau is a world-renowned neuroscientist, best-selling author and entrepreneur. Beau is also the founder and CEO of Lab of Misfits, the world's first neuro-design studio. His studies in human perception have taken him well beyond the scientific domain and into the fields of education, the arts and business. He has been a two-time main stage TED speaker and spoken at the G8, Google's ZeitgeistMinds, Wired, and made contributions to BBC's Horizon, National Geographic Channel and PBS. Beau's aim is to use the principles of perception to enable people to think differently about both themselves and the world around them. Hello, Beau. Thank you for joining me.
Hello, Maria. It's lovely to see you.
Thank you. So let's start. Why neuroscience? Where did that come from? Why did you study?
Why did I study neuroscience? Well, let's see. Do you want the honest answer or the other one?
I want the honest answer.
The reason is because I wanted to be a cardiothoracic surgeon, and I was at Berkeley. And my first 2 years, I was on academic probation, and my last 2 years, I was on the honor roll. And so the first 2 years, I was in the bottom 2%. The last 2 years, I was in the top 2%. So on average, I didn't have the scores to get into medical school, but I still was fascinated by biology, and I was still fascinated by how the body works and how we engage in the world. So I thought, well, if I'm going to study the body rather than fix it, I want to study the most interesting part, which is the brain. So then I went to Edinburgh Medical School in Scotland to do that. And now actually I've learned that actually you can fix the brain, but you can fix it in a different way.
And actually tell us a little bit, because you've mentioned Edinburgh, and I mean, I know your background. You've got a very global accent. What is your nationality? What is your background? Why is your accent so global?
Global or just confused. So I was born and raised in Seattle and then San Francisco. So I was an undergrad at Berkeley University, and I have family that lives in San Francisco, Seattle, and Washington, D.C. So I spent time in both those, in all three places. But then when I was just early 20s, I moved to Britain, Scotland in particular, and there I remained for 25 years. So basically, almost quite literally, half my life was in the States, and the other half was in Britain, with a bit of sojourn into Paris. And so that's where, I suppose, the Brits don't necessarily think I have an accent, but nor do the Americans. So I just sort of don't fit anywhere, it seems. Hence the Lab of Misfits.
Yes, absolutely. And we'll go on to that. But I wanted to ask you, first of all, about the fact that you say that we experience everything through our brains, that we never ever really see reality. So I'm here, people listening to the podcast obviously are listening to an audio, but we're actually on video, we're on a video link. So am I not really seeing you then?
Yes and no. I mean, this is not postmodern relativism. The world exists. There's a physical world out there. It's just that we don't see it. What do I mean by that? What we see is the meaning of the information, not the information. The information that's falling onto your eyes is, in quite a literal sense, meaningless. So data by itself is pointless. There is no inherent value in any piece of data. So people working on big data is pointless, which makes them essential, right? Because data doesn't tell you what to do. It's the interpretation, it's the utility of that data that's meaningful. And so that's true at the most basic level of your eyes or your nose, your touch, your hearing. The data could literally mean anything, and that it could be something large and far away or something small and up close. Your brain has no way of knowing from the data itself. So the only thing it can use is its history. So the brain evolved to continually redefine normality.
Wow, okay. So once you understand that, does that help you in terms of your relationships and how you see the world and how you interact with people?
I think it's fundamental to exactly that. So once you understand how perception works, you can't but help see yourself in the world in a different way and engage in it in a different way. First of all, we learn that everything that you see, as soon as you open your eyes, in fact, even before you open your eyes, everything you're thinking is grounded in your history of biases and assumptions. That's what history gives you. And many of those biases and assumptions you actually inherited. You might have inherited from your family, from your culture, from your organization, or even your evolutionary ancestors, which means most of your life happened without you even there, right? So every time you engage with the world, you're engaging through assumptions and bias, not sometimes, all the time. And the first step to being able to see differently is to acknowledge it, that that's the case. The problem is that many of those biases and assumptions, if not most of them, we don't even know what they are. So you're engaging with the world through this objective lens. You think it's an objective lens, when in fact it's subjective, and you're not even aware of the biases that are part of that subjective experience. And again, having that awareness creates the possibility that you might then be able to see differently. So yes, understanding perception gives us the way to be able to engage with the world in a different way, but we can also use the principles of perception to see differently, because that's what the brain evolved to do.
Okay,
Let's take
wow.
advantage of the mechanisms that are already there to see differently.
Okay, and what is neuro-design that you do at Lab of Misfits? What is that about?
So the idea with neuro-design is that the lab does two things. We want to understand what these principles are, but then we want to apply those principles. So the neuro is, of course, understanding the principles, and the design is the application of them. So everything that the lab does, and basically the lab is here to become an experiential space, an experiential lab. And so we create experiences that enable people to see differently. And we do that by combining our expertise in neuroscience, but also design and production. And we then create these opportunities for people to embody those principles and again, to have the possibility of seeing themselves in the world differently. Because the fact is, the world is changing faster and faster. And as we become more interconnected, your control over that world becomes increasingly less, right? This is just mathematics, which means that the most successful systems in nature are the ones that adapt. So what we really need to do is become not just adapt, but become adaptable. And the brain evolved to do that. So why try to solve the problem again? We've had millions of years of evolution that enabled us to do that. So let's just figure out what those principles are and then apply them. And that's where the design comes in.
Can you give us an example of perhaps one of these experiments, these labs that you've created for a client? Are you allowed to share something like that?
Yeah, so we've created one, for instance, for L'Oreal on empowerment. And so we created a whole set of experiments where women would come into a space and we would literally create an experience for them, but it's an experiential experiment. So it's both an experience, but an experiment. So we're collecting data, etc. And the women walk away with a better understanding of themselves. And we've actually shown that through the project with L'Oreal, we're actually better able to create a sense of empowerment in those women. And we filmed it, etc. And so L'Oreal were then able to use that as content for PR and marketing as well. Another project we're doing is with Cirque du Soleil, where we're doing the neuroscience of awe and wonder. And so we're able to record the brain activity of participants while watching a Cirque du Soleil event, and also look at the behavioral, the unconscious changes in their behavior before and after the event. And for us, that helps us better understand awe and wonder. But for Cirque du Soleil, they then can own awe and wonder, right? For their PR and marketing and the content and the data. So in terms of their ability to engage with the world, they're able to engage in a far more meaningful way. And they're able to have sort of hits at PR and marketing that they never had before.
That's amazing. I mean, Cirque du Soleil obviously is an incredible experience in itself anyway. If they're going to have an even greater understanding and a greater connection, I can't even begin to imagine what that could potentially look like. That's very exciting.
That's right. And it also feeds back into the ability for their own organization to become adaptable. And of course, their audience walks away with a better sense of loyalty because Cirque du Soleil created an experience that helped their audience better understand themselves. Okay. So for us, it's a new way for brands and organizations to engage with their audiences through the neurodesign, right? The one thing hits multiple things simultaneously: brand engagement, loyalty, attention, understanding, insight. And they also create the possibility of being purpose-driven, and they actually contribute to our deeper understanding of what it is to be human, all at the same time.
Wow. That's huge. That's just brilliant.
And it works. And it works. That's the beauty of it.
Wow. What's very exciting, because like when you and I have talked about this before, where often brands and companies are engaging with the average consumer, and that's a really big problem. Does this get around that you're actually able to engage on a much more personal level?
Yes, to a large extent, because if they're going to, the fact is that brands engage with people, And if you don't understand what it is to be human, how on earth are you able to engage with them in a meaningful way? So first, you have to understand what are the drivers of people, and also brands want their audience to expand or to change. Well, what are the barriers to change? How best to engage with an audience in that way? Or if you want your audience to have a stronger sense of loyalty, what is required for the brain to feel loyalty, right? And what's more, that if they can engage with their audiences in a new way, that actually enables their audiences to have insight to themselves, they also create loyalty that way as well.
Okay, so I know also that you're big into augmented reality. Can you tell us a bit about some of the work that you're doing there?
Yeah, so we have an augmented reality startup company that we founded about 6 years ago. So we have patents in AR space, 4 or 5 patents in AR space. And of course, as everybody knows, AR is now possibly one of the hottest topics in technology. And everyone believes it to be the future. And we're very fortunate to be very early on that. So we are now creating a number of platforms for augmented reality. One will be the world's first social AR platform. And the other is an augmented reality product that's around storytelling and location. So imagine podcasts, but podcasts in location. So but the first one, which is called Aquila, what it enables you to do is to take your social platforms, your social networks, and carry them wherever you go. So you could be in a conference, for instance, and you could float your Aquila. What that means is you have your photograph and it follows you wherever you go. And so people get off their phone, they can see the photograph. I can see Maria's photograph over there. I said, well, I wonder who she is. I can see her photograph, I can grab it, and then I can see all of her social profiles, the ones that she lets in her Spotify playlist, right? Even her personal website or her Facebook page. And what it's really about is using technology to get people to re-engage with the world and re-engage with each other, because that's where your brain lives. That's where your brain makes meaning, is in the physical world, not by passively receiving information, but by actively engaging with the people in the space around you. So we're creating technologies that enable that. And those can actually be used at the talks that I give and other in nightclubs and in conferences, etc.
So you've got to be careful what you put out there on your social media now, because people are going to be able with Aquila to be able to see.
Well, if you so choose, but what's interesting is actually it would also enables people to be more honest, because what people do with Facebook is they can put anything up, but there's no recompense. You can hide behind it. But here you're present, you're there. And it's basically a digital handshake. Why do we say, hi, how are you? And then 3 minutes later, you say, so how are you? Because we need that ritual in order to start a conversation. When you go to a conference, it doesn't say your name, just your name. It says what you might be interested in. Talk to me about this. So it's a way of facilitating those conversations. We're basically the initiator of conversation.
Brilliant. And better conversations in that case. So I want to come back to another area that I know you talk about. And I think it's an area that, again, relates really strongly in neuroscience. It's to risk and uncertainty. So how does the human brain deal with risk and uncertainty?
Right. So risk and uncertainty, probably the fundamental challenge that your brain evolved to resolve. In fact, not just human brains, all brains evolved to resolve is uncertainty. Right? We hate uncertainty. We hate uncertainty. Why? Because to not know during evolution was to die. Right? If you weren't sure that was a predator, it was too late. So your brain evolved to take what is uncertain and make it certain, right? What is unpredictable and make it predictable. So that's why if you go down below in a boat, right, you'll feel seasick because your eyes are moving to register your boat, and you say, well, oh, we're standing still, but in your ears saying, no, we're moving. And so your brain gets ill because it can't deal with that conflict. So almost every human behavior is about decreasing uncertainty. That's why Uber is successful. It's not simply because they tell you because it's a faster way to order a taxi. It's because they tell you when the taxi is going to arrive, right? That's why they have times on bus shelters, because if the bus is going to be 25 minutes late, at least I know it's going to be 25 minutes late. So everything's about decreasing uncertainty. The irony is that it's only by stepping into uncertainty that you can actually see differently. And that's basically what I talk to people about. How can you actually go against this millions of years of evolution and go to the very place that you evolved to avoid? And the beauty is actually that the brain evolution gave us a solution to that, because to step into uncertainty is so essential that we had to have a mechanism. And it's that mechanism of perception, of changing perceptions, that I talk to people about.
Brilliant, brilliant. And actually, when you speak to audiences, you often start off by saying you're going to come away knowing less than you did at the beginning of this talk, by the time you get to the end of the talk, which probably is not a great way for us to be marketing you, actually. We must rethink that. But there's a good reason you say that. Why do you say that? Can you expand on that?
Yeah, the reason why I say that is because I want people to not know at a very deep level. So I want them to not know. So why do I say that? Basically, because nothing interesting begins with knowing, it begins with not knowing. It begins with a question, not with an answer. And too often people engage in situations where they, can I pause for 1 second?
Yes, I'm just clap for my editor so we know we paused.
1 second. Fernanda, can we switch that off? Sorry. Sorry, just give me another few minutes, because we pick up sound, any sound in here. Fernanda? We pick up any sounds in here. Okay, because they're doing a recording.
Super. So shall I ask that question again?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So right, starting again, Martin. When you speak, you often say to audiences that they will come away knowing less at the end of your session than at the beginning, which might not be the best way for us to be doing the marketing of your sessions, actually, when I think about it. But there's a very good reason you say that. So can you share with us why you say that?
Yes, because nothing interesting begins with knowing, it begins with not knowing, right? Because if you think about design thinking almost always begins with a problem. But if I come up with a great solution to a useless problem, who really cares? The cash is in a good question, right? And that's what's the powerful thing about the brain, and the powerful thing about science is the ability to ask a good question. And so and the only way to do that is if you enter with humility, you enter with the excitement of stepping into uncertainty, which is to enter a situation with a question, and then to iterate and find better and better questions. So iteration is not really about finding better and better solutions. It's about finding better and better questions, right? And so I want to get the audience to experience that process of actually not knowing, i.e. asking a question, right? And being excited about asking questions. And that's where the leadership comes in. That's where ecology comes in, is creating that environment that enables people to step into uncertainty, to ask a good question.
Okay, so do you think that companies often are asking the wrong questions of their people when they're focusing on efficiency and profitability and not focusing on innovation?
Yes, companies are often, not always, of course, but often asking the wrong questions because partly they're not even asking questions, right? So innovation, you mentioned innovation has two sides. It has creativity and it has efficiency. This is true in biology as well, in nature as well. You have exploration and you have exploitation. You always have these two sides. And almost every company begins with creativity. They have a great idea. And the next best step is to make that idea efficient. That is a very good idea. And the best environment in biology for creating that environment for efficiency is competition. Okay. The problem is the company then stops, but the world doesn't. So the world continues to change. So what companies then try to do is they find themselves becoming increasingly inefficient because the world around them has shifted. So again, they try to maximize efficiency again. They'll lay off people, they'll try to cut costs, etc. Not necessarily a bad idea, but the world keeps changing. What they have to do is then enter the cycle again. So they have to again begin with creativity, begin with a question, right? And then they go through that creativity to efficiency cycle again, but they rarely do that. So instead, what they do is they want their employees to be creative, but they have an environment of efficiency in which to be creative. It's the wrong kind of environment, right? The environment they're looking for is one that can enable them not to be in one or the other, but to be able to move between them. Because to be adaptable is not to be in creativity or in efficiency. If after my talks, I tell them, I don't want them to walk out of the space and start trying to see everything differently, because if a bus is coming at them, I want them to get out of the way as fast as possible, right? Wisdom is knowing when to be in one or the other and how to create an environment and actually able to move, because life is movement. It's not being in one or the other.
Brilliant. I love that. You come out with so much great stuff, Beau. So I want to talk a little bit about your book. So deviate and a deviation. What does it mean? Is it to be a deviator or deviant? What is the word?
So it's to be a deviator, right? And to deviate is really actually to be yourself, right? What I'm trying to do is demystify creativity. There's nothing creative about creativity. Creativity is only creative from the outside, not from the inside, right? It's because we have this illusion that to be creative is to put two things that are far apart together, that somehow your brain has to make that magical leap. Your brain doesn't make leaps. Your brain only ever makes small steps to the next most likely possible, right? But what's possible for one person is different from what's possible for another. Right? So to deviate is basically to give people the principles and the understanding for how they can change that space of possibility, not to make big jumps. It's still to make small steps, but to change the steps that you make by changing your assumptions and biases that define that space. But to question what you assume to be true already is very, very difficult because that takes you into uncertainty. So how can we get people to challenge their bias and assumptions in order to change their space of possibility so that their next step is a new one, right? And that's what deviate is about. And that is to deviate from what everyone else is doing, to deviate what you might have been doing in the past. And I want to demystify and say, this is something you can learn. This is not something you're born with. We can all be deviators.
Brilliant. Let's all go be deviators, not be deviant, but be deviators. But sorry, you were going to say something.
Well, actually, as a consequence, you become deviant, right? Because to be deviant is deviant relative to a norm, right? So, but to be deviant is not necessarily a bad thing. It's just to be different. And actually, that's why nothing interesting, so the best things in life don't literally make sense, right? Because what makes sense is the medium, is the average, is the mean, right? But that's not where innovation lives. Innovation doesn't live at the average. It lives out in the periphery and becomes the future average, right? So that's why you have to deviate. You have to step away from the average. And to do so is to follow your own trajectory, right? Because everyone has that possibility. It's just whether or not your next step is your reference for your next step is what everyone else is doing or what you are doing. And at a future time, what will happen is you'll look up and you'll realize, whoa, I'm in a different place. Not because you tried to, just because you followed what made sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I love that. So, Beau, how did you get into speaking for companies? How did that begin?
How did it begin to speak with companies? Because I actually really enjoy it now. When I first started, I wasn't so keen, but now I really enjoy it. And it's because I'm interested in companies changing. But if you want to change a company, you have to change the people, right? So if companies want to be more creative, the individuals have to be more creative. And they can't just be creative within the context of a company, they have to live creatively, right? So my talks are not just about the organization, they're about the individuals of the organization, whether or not they're at the organization. It's how they are at home with their kids, with their partner, how they engage with life. Because these principles transcend business. They're relevant to what it is to be human, but they're directly applicable to how we engage in the world with business. But what's more, if we can change businesses and get them to be more creative and innovative, that actually will facilitate a more creative and innovative world, because companies have tremendous influence on how the rest of us experience our lives. So there's a positive feedback system that I'm trying to facilitate through the public speaking. And so when I better understood how perception works, it felt so obvious. And what's wonderful is once you communicate that to people, it also feels obvious to them after than
Yes.
it really does before.
Yeah, and it's really useful to understand it and to apply. It's brilliant. So finally, I want to ask you a bit of a personal question here. I want to find out, how did you get into the world of bonobo monkeys?
Bonobo primates.
Oh, primates, apologies.
Bonobo primates. How did I get in? Well, I'm not in them at all. It's my wife who is in them. So because I happened to meet this wonderful woman who studies play behavior. And she studies play behavior because that is, in fact, one of the secrets, which is, what did evolution give us that enabled us to step into uncertainty? It gave us play, right? And play is a deeply, not just philosophical, but a deeply significant behavior, right? There's tremendous cost in playing, so it has to be there for a reason. And this is one of the reasons that it enables us to step into uncertainty and how to be in that space of uncertainty. And bonobos, who are one of our closest living relatives, they are remarkable at play. So it's in trying to understand the principles, the deeper biological principles of play, that we could then apply and create environments and spaces, architecture, organizations, way of interactions by these principles. And that's what she studies. And that's also what we were studying, because science is play. And we create a whole education program around that concept that results in the youngest published scientist in the world and the youngest ever TED speaker, thinking that science is play, but play with intention. In fact, anything that is creative is play with intention. And it's how you create that environment within an organization, a business, that will enable them to then step forward in new ways that they didn't think so before.
Well, listen, it's a lovely place to end, to think about play, and also for us to consider the amazing conversations you and your wife must have over the dinner table. So thank you for that. Thank you both.
Thank you so much. All right. Thanks, Maria.
I'm just going to turn the recording off now.